Thank you, Presiding Officer. Early on in this debate, we had a bizarre contribution from Kenneth Gibson, convener of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. Now, I've been the convener of 3 committees in my time in this Parliament. I had always understood the role of a committee convener in a Stage 1 debate was to speak on behalf of the committee and express the views in the committee report, not to be a partisan lapdog for the Scottish Government, which is what we heard from Mr Gibson during his speech. And I do hope, Presiding Officer, if that is going to be the trend in future debates, that you and the Bureau will reflect on the time available to committee conveners to speak in Stage 1 debates if they're going to be partisan. But I'll give way.
Is the reason why
Kenneth
you and
Gibson.
your colleague Mr Kerr are not so upset is because people were reminded of the rather ridiculous comments you made post-budget last September, and if you hadn't been named, you wouldn't have had any interventions, because last year I was more partisan than this year. If you'd actually listened to the speech, you would find that most of the criticism levied was actually towards issues such as the lack of reform, etc. going forward. So it was a very balanced speech, but the reality is it was your ego and Mr Kerr's that made you intervene.
Murdo Fraser.
Well, that was a second speech by the convener of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. But let me come to some of the points of substance that he raised, because he seemed to suggest, and there was a theme coming from the SNP benches, he seemed to suggest that the economic challenges being faced in the United Kingdom are somehow unique to the United Kingdom. But that, of course, is not the case. It is true inflation is high, but inflation is coming down. Inflation is also high in Europe, Presiding Officer, and is coming down. In fact, in the month of November, UK inflation was lower than the EU average. In the month of December, UK inflation was lower than in many other European countries. It is true. No, I need to make this point. It is true that this morning, the Bank of England increased interest rates in the United Kingdom by 50 basis points. It is also true that today the European Central Bank increased interest rates by exactly the same level, 50 basis points. It is also true that yesterday the Fed in the USA increased interest rates in the United Kingdom. It is also true that interest rates are today in the United Kingdom lower than they are in the USA and in Canada. Now, Presiding Officer, maybe it is the case that Liz Truss is to blame for what is happening in the USA, in Canada, in Germany, in Italy, in France and the rest of Europe, but I think, frankly, that is somewhat unlikely. Now, Presiding Officer, let's look at the overall size of the budget. I will, if the member is brief.
Daniel Johnson.
I was just wondering how many of those countries withdrew hundreds of mortgage products in September this year, like happened after the mini-budget and Liz Truss's intervention.
Murdo Fraser.
Well, there are plenty of mortgage products available today, Mr Johnson. You need to keep up with the news and see what's happening. But I want to turn and look at the overall size of the budget, because there was, in the current financial year, I think this is widely accepted, a record high level block grant from the UK Government to the Scottish Government. And for the year that's coming, for the year we're talking about, the Fraser of Allen Institute say that the block grant more or less protects the money to the Scottish Government against inflation. So the Scottish Government has, in historic terms, looking back over the period of devolution, more money to spend than virtually every year previously. And yet, at the same time, taxes are going up and services are being cut, thanks to the choices they are making. And we should never forget, in all this, that in Scotland we have more than £2,000 to spend for every man, woman and child in the country than is the UK average, thanks to the Barnett formula that they want to get rid of, Presiding Officer. And that is the union dividend that John Mason was looking for. Now, this is about choices. And Liz Smith set out the approach we would take that would be different. Starting with the National Care Service, at least £1.3 billion to be spent over the next 5 years. That is money that could be reallocated elsewhere. We would look at the Constitution budget and the money being spent on civil servants preparing for another independence referendum that's not now going to take place. We look at the money wasted on projects such as BIFAD, such as Prestwick Airport, such as the ferries. But there's a more fundamental point here, isn't there? Because we know that the UK economy has, since 2014, grown at precisely one-half of the UK average rate. And if we could only just match the rate of growth of the UK economy, we'd have hundreds of millions of pounds extra in tax revenue to spend, and that's a matter the Scottish Government needs to be paying attention to. And that's not just a historic issue, it's one for the future, as both Willie Rennie and Liz Smith pointed out. So we set out in this budget our ask. We believe the support for business, the 75% rates relief for those in the retail, hospitality and leisure sector that is available elsewhere in the United Kingdom, should be available here in Scotland. We believe that the settlement being proposed for local government, as Douglas Lumsden pointed out, is unfair. Mr Swinney set out how he's giving local councils more money, and yet all we hear from them is that they're having to cut services. Yesterday I got a letter from Councillor David Ross, the leader of Fife Council, expressing deep concern at the cuts in Fife Council, saying that already, despite identifying £22 million of savings for the coming year, they're still facing another £11.5 million, rising to £33 million next year and £54 million the year after. And that is reflected right across the country in Perthwick and Ross Council, that Mr Swinney will be familiar with. They're looking at a funding gap of £26 million in the coming year. And it's not just Labour-led councils or Conservative-led councils making these concerns. SNP council leaders are making exactly the same concerns as well. And what this will lead to is cuts in services, hikes in council tax. We're going to see school crossing patrollers going, breakfast clubs being scrapped, educational psychologists scrapped, libraries being closed, the cultural offer being cut back. And we don't know yet what's going to happen to teachers, because we're waiting to hear if teacher numbers will be protected. But Mark Griffin, I thought, made a really good point, because even if teachers are protected, that will come at the expense of classroom assistants. It will come at the expense of janitors. It will come at the expense of catering staff, all the other people working in education, and that will be to the net detriment of our young people, Presiding Officer. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, John Swinney at the outset said he was going to take a progressive path. Well, we know now what that progressive path looks like. Despite having more money to spend than ever before, he's hiking taxes, hiking income taxes. We'll see council taxes hiked, and at the same time, we'll see cuts to vital services for people across Scotland. That's what this budget delivers, and that's why we need to vote against it.